For the second day in a row, thousands of Palestinians have flooded the streets of northern Gaza, not just to demand an end to the war with Israel, but allegedly, according to the AP and the Wall Street Journal, to call out Hamas itself. In a rare display of dissent, protesters in Beit Lahia in Gaza City and Jabalia chanted, "Hamas, get out," a direct challenge to the militant group that has ruled Gaza for nearly 2 decades. With 17 months of relentless war, displacement, and devastation, some say that the frustration is just boiling over. Many people say Hamas has failed them, blaming its leadership for prolonging the suffering while Israel continues its deadly assault. One protester put it plainly: "We can't stop Israel from killing us, but we can press Hamas to give concessions." Others say they feel abandoned, not just by Hamas, but by Israel, by the Palestinian Authority, and by the world. And while Hamas has violently crushed past protests, this time its forces have kept a lower profile. We could ask why, but the other question is, will these demonstrations change anything? I'm fascinated by this story. It's been so important for Zionists to tag me in this, for Western media outlets to tag me in this, and to say, "Mark, you gotta talk about this story." Well, look, I think it's interesting to talk about, and I'm not afraid to talk about this, but I think we have to put this story in some context. First of all, Hamas has been in leadership in Gaza for 19 years now, more than 20 years. And it's not unreasonable to say that people deserve democratic participation, that it's not inaccurate to say that Hamas rules without a mandate. It's not inaccurate to say that the Palestinian Authority rules without a mandate, that there just haven't been free elections in Palestine for a long time. But it's important for us to get to the why of it. It's important to get to the why of it. Don't let the mainstream media make this about Palestinians want to get rid of Hamas and it become an excuse to justify or legitimize the genocide that Israel has engaged in for the last year and a half, or the siege that's engaged in for the last 2 decades, or the occupation that it's engaged in for the last 58 years, or the apartheid state that it's created and engaged in for the last 77 years. Let's be honest here. You know, as someone who spent a lot of time in Palestine, when I would talk to Palestinians on the street, many of them would say that they were unhappy with the PA, the Palestinian Authority, who was ruling the West Bank in East Jerusalem, and with Hamas, who was ruling Gaza. Palestinians are complicated, and they don't operate with a single political opinion. Like every people, there's dissenting and differing opinions. So the fact that some people are unhappy with Hamas is reasonable, and it's not surprising. There's no reason to believe that Palestinians are uniformly in support of Hamas. That's never been the case. It was not the case about Hamas, not the case about Fatah, it's not the case about Jubla, it's not the case about the Nusra Front, PFLP, Popular Front. It's not the case about any of these groups. What you've seen over the last year and a half is not a uncritical deference to Hamas. What you've seen is the Palestinian people understand that whatever internal disagreements may exist, they are relatively unimportant in relation to the genocidal assault that is taking place in Palestine, on Palestine, by the Israeli government. And so when the Western media and the Zionist Hezbollah attempts to construct a narrative that, oh, you know, Palestine would be fine if they would just make different choices. Palestinians would be fine if, the AIPAC talking point that Hillary Clinton and others echoed, including Donald Trump. There's no difference. Palestinians could have chosen democracy. They chose Hamas. They could have chosen paradise. They chose Hamas. This idea that Palestinians are the authors of their own misery, and therefore they have to make a different choice. That has been the narrative from the West and has been wholly untrue and unreasonable for several reasons. Let's start with the fact that Hamas was democratically elected. Now, does Hamas have a democratic mandate now? No. Do Palestinians deserve a free election to elect whoever they want? Absolutely. But the question is, why have they not been able to do that? Hamas has never had a day of uninterrupted, unencumbered rule. They just haven't. From the moment Hamas was elected, which surprised the United States and other Western powers, the United States has worked to undermine Hamas's leadership. Also, although Israel said that they left in the end of 2005, the beginning of 2006, they did not leave Gaza. They relocated to they relocated from inside of Gaza to the outside of Gaza. They border it. Israel borders Gaza by land, air, sea. They control the aeromagnetic sphere, the population registry. They control what goes in. They control what goes out. They control who goes in. They control who goes out. Why is this relevant? Because all the conversation about Palestinian misery being Hamas's fault for the last 20 years neglects the fact that Israel has waged war on Hamas from day one and has paid considerable energy and devoted considerable resources to making sure that Palestinians don't have a day of self-determination. And that lack of self-determination doesn't just stop at one border. You got Zionists like New York Yankee 17 says, what about their border with Egypt? I think you may not know this, or you're being dishonest, or you're being sincere. I don't know. You're either pretending to not know, or you really don't know. Either way, Israel does security coordination at the Rafah border too. You kidding me? You think when somebody goes in from Egypt into maybe not Khan Yunis, but Rafah, you think they do that without Israel knowing? There's no sovereignty. The fact that, in practice, the fact that Israel can shut down the power of Gaza tells you Gaza does not have self-determination. Hamas runs Gaza. Then how is Israel able to turn off the power and the water? What are we talking about here? And so the desire, or even the legitimacy, start with the legitimacy of a critique of Hamas is there. Nobody's above criticism. But what Palestinian civil society has done, and what the Palestinian global diaspora has done, is effectively said, we're going to speak with one voice to the extent that we can as we try to stop this genocide from happening. Now, internally, yes, there are people who are frustrated with Hamas. I don't know if these are real protesters or fake protesters. I'm going to assume they're real. And I'm going to assume that they're there because they're genuinely frustrated with Hamas. That's fine. They should be able to protest Hamas. And I hope that Hamas allows them to protest and doesn't undermine democratic practices and democratic actions like free speech, like dissent. I'm with all that. But regardless, let us not pretend. Let us not pretend that whatever disagreement people have with Hamas inside of Gaza, that it amounts to anything of substance in relation to the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem of Gaza is not Hamas. The fundamental problem of Hamas, or the fundamental problem of Gaza is Israel. The fundamental problem of the West Bank isn't the PA, it's Israel. Like, as long as Palestinian land is being occupied or annexed, as long as Palestinians don't have full participation in democratic life throughout the entire region, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. If they don't have that, then what are we talking about? What are we talking about? So please, y'all, there are going to be some trolls, and there are going to be some sincere people, and there's going to be some jerks, and there's going to be some ideological opponents who are all going to say, what about the people protesting Hamas inside of Gaza? Cool. If you think that those protests of Hamas are legitimate all of a sudden, now you care about Palestinian protests. What about the Great March of Return when they were protesting Israel's occupation and Israel's settler colonial practices? What about all the protests and acts of resistance that Palestinians have engaged in for the last 100 years? What about those? Are any of those legitimate? Or is it just the 12 Palestinians that got mad at Hamas today? What are we talking about? Anyway.